I want to touch upon how we go about translating foreign currency dividends. You'll have seen the math before, but I just want to use this as an example because it's something that occurs a lot in real life. I mean, the world is a world of international business, and so it's often the case that, you have company A located in one country and company B located in another. And, like any investment, any company can buy a piece or an equity stake of another company, assuming both parties are willing. And often that happens across borders as well. So company A here might buy a 20% stake in company B, and we're talking about equity stakes here. And so that entitles company A to receive 20% of the share of company B's profits in perpetuity. Now, the wrinkle is that company B is located in another country and it does business in that country. And so it generates foreign currency because it does business in that country. And that country uses that currency that is foreign to this company. And so when those profits get paid by company B in the form of dividends, it's not clear what they're actually worth because, they start out in one currency and then they get translated into another. What they're worth, whether it's small or large, depends on what the exchange rate is at the time that they're transferred. So we'll talk about some ways to mitigate that risk a little bit later on. For now, let's just look at a few calculations of what this dividend would be worth under different exchange rates. So we're going to use an example here. Company A is going to be BP, standing for British Petroleum. Now, despite the name, we're going to use dollars here rather than British pounds because, one, it makes it simpler. But two is that the dollar is the most commonly used currency when it comes to energy products such as oil. And that brings us to company B, which is going to be Rosneft, one of the biggest Russian oil companies, quasi-state owned. So it used to be that BP had a stake in Rosneft, and this is real, not just a kind of a homework example, back in 2013, BP pulled out because political risk in Russia was changing around this time. BP had certain climate goals that it was starting to think about. But at least for the moment and for the next couple of years, BP was still receiving dividends from Rosneft because of this 20% stake. And in 2014, that dividend amounted to 26 billion rubles, which is the currency of Russia. And it sounds like a lot, and it is. But if we want to figure out how much that is in terms of dollars, we can use this formula. We take the dividend, this 26 billion rubles, and divide it by the spot exchange rate. And as long as we've got rubles on the top in the denominator here, then we can take the exchange rate in rubles per dollars here, and it'll come out all right. So at the time, Russian ruble was trading at 34.9 to the dollar. That was our spot rate. And so if we slide this spot rate in, that gives us the value of what this dividend payment is worth in terms of dollars. And you can start to see the uncertainty that can happen when doing international business. Not only do you not necessarily know what the dividend is going to be next year, you also don't necessarily know what it's going to be worth next year. But in this example, we do know because it's happened, and the dividend in USD is about $744 million. So this is in 2014. This is the dividend that BP received for its investment in Rosneft in 2014. But by 2015, Russia had invaded Crimea, which is the southeastern portion of Ukraine. Rosneft still paid a dividend of 26 billion rubles that year, but the worth of what those rubles were in dollars changed. Western countries imposed sanctions on Russia, which is sort of like something that forbids companies in those countries from doing business in certain circumstances with Russian citizens or companies. And what that has the impact of, among other things, is a weakening of that currency's value. Short of instituting capital controls, which is something that Russia did in its most recent round of invasion of Ukraine, but short of capital controls, the currency that is subject to sanctions will weaken. And so that's what happened. The ruble went from 34.9 to 75.25. And so even though the same amount of dividends were paid in terms of rubles that year, the amount in terms of dollars in 2015 was significantly reduced from 744 million to 345 million. So this is a type of foreign exchange rate risk that we'll talk about how to manage using derivatives and such in just a little bit. But there is a sort of risk that we can't really manage around, short of just not investing or doing business in that country. And that's the risk of capital controls. When Russia invaded again in 2022, the situation for foreign energy companies doing business in Russia at the time became much worse. Precisely how is a little bit complicated and convoluted, but basically because of capital controls and sanctions, not only dividends for foreign companies, but also the equity stakes themselves were completely written off to a zero value. So political risk can be much harder to quantify and control when it comes to foreign investment.